So this is Baruch here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel, and we're continuing on as we've seen the development of the Jewish world around the year 1000. Around the year 1000 as we progress. And the subject of the Shiurim is how the Jews survived, that Jews in fact did survive the Middle Ages and today as well. So exactly how does this work? So let's see. So now we saw yesterday that the Babylonia was a tremendous outreach, and really this is the source of the Babylonian Talmud, which is in yeshivas throughout the history of the Jewish people, has been studied intensely. And this comes really to the Babylonia. But at the same time, that's what we're getting to now. Eretz Yisrael had great yeshivas also. So there's a competition between the two. And I'm saying that this is the origin, really, of the difference between the Sephardic and the Ashkenaz community, because the Talmud became the lingua franca of the Ashkenaz, whereas the Zohar and the mystical writings, poetries, and things like that became based out of Eretz Yisrael. Nonetheless, there was halacha involved in all of it. There's a lot of coordination, but also friction. So let's go over and see. This is how history progresses according to Dr. Haim Beinart. Now this is where we ended yesterday. It says that despite the dangers of land and seas, because the times were very, very anti-Jewish, Jews continued to make pilgrimages to Eretz Yisrael, especially during the Feast of Tabernacles, which we decided is Sukkot. Their destinations were chiefly Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, and Hebron. With them came Jews who wished to settle in Jerusalem. Among the settlers was a document we got from the Aveli Sion, the mourners of Zion, people who abandoned their families, repudiated their lands of birth, left cities, and dwelt in the mountains. Who are these people? These are some ascetic group. People from the east and the west who set their sights on settling in Jerusalem, forsook their possessions and renounced the temporal world. Okay, that's a description. The Karaite scholar Saul ben Mazliah relates that Jerusalem at this time was a haven for all who fled, a comfort for all mourners, and a repose for the poor and humble, wherein resided servants of the Lord who were gathered unto her, one from a town, another from a family, wherein resided dirge singer and eulogizers in Hebrew, Persian, and Arabic. Now what did he just describe there? He described that during this period, which is approximately, let's say, between around the year 1000, give or take, going all the way up and going further, there were good times and then really bad times. But nonetheless, people came to Eretz Yisrael, and they came there as a refuge, to escape, a place to escape. And he used the fact that they escaped their families. They went up into the mountains. Of course, Eretz Yisrael is a very mountainous place. Anyway, let's go on. This is what was happening in Eretz Yisrael. So we're trying to understand the Mediterranean world a little bit, because that's where Eretz Yisrael is. Ramla was an important center for Jews from Babylon, known as Knesset al-Irakim, or Rakim. So he says, so that's who they were. Just as Jews from Eretz Yisrael who lived in Egypt were known as Knesset al-Shamin. So in other words, these are Jews that came, the Karaites had their own synagogue in Ramla, so Ramla became a major center. Eretz Yisrael also served as a transit port for Jews emigrating from east to west. Going on. We're in Eretz Yisrael now. Bedouin invasions and disturbances in the years 1029 and 1030 did not hinder Jewish immigration from Spain, as it attested in a letter sent from Jerusalem to Toledo in 1053. describing the Sephardim who resided in Ramlah and Jerusalem with their wives and children. Let me read it again. The Bedouin invasions and disturbances in 1029 and 1030 were moving up in the year 1000. It didn't stop Jewish immigration even from Spain. So people kept coming to Eretz Israel, as is attested in a letter sent from Jerusalem to Toledo in 1053, describing the Sephardim who resided in Ramlah, so here were Spanish people at Jerusalem with their wives and children. And we always do the same thing. We go to landslide. That's what they said, that's what it used to say. This is that if your family came from a certain area, you found other people who came from that area and you settled in together. Then different areas, because the Jews are a hodgepodge of ethnic backgrounds. Even the Sephardic scholar Yosef ibn Abitur intended to leave Spain and emigrated to Eretz Yisrael, but one of his friends advised him to go first to Egypt. The story of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's Aliyah typifies a trend among many Jews in those days. Now you're talking about 1,000 years ago. Immigrants also came to Eretz Yisrael from North Africa and Syria. Close ties existed between the Jews of Tripoli and Eretz Yisrael. Wills from Italy. Now we're still in the Mediterranean world. Egypt and North Africa bear witness to the custom of reinterring the bones of the Jewish dead in the Holy Land. Now what did this mean? It meant really basically, this is the Mishnah describes how the ancient practice was. The people were buried, and when the flesh was gone, the bones were collected. It was a very important ceremony, and they were brought into caves. This is the ideal way, and buried in caves, different slots, family caves. There were, however, still many Jews who left Eretz Yisrael. There were a lot of people leaving, so people coming and going. Those who emigrated to Egypt established communities such as in Alexandria. Many of the emigres were learned men and graduates of yeshivot, and it is reasonable to assume that the educational needs of the diaspora communities were what motivated them to emigrate in order to teach the Torah. In contrast to the lack of livelihood in Jerusalem, Ramlah held the title of the merchant's clerk. What does that mean? He apparently served as a third-party trustee. I don't know who this held the title. He said one of the resident Jews held the title of merchant's clerk. He was an important merchant, obviously. He apparently served as a third-party trustee for disputed property, or perhaps he was the head of the merchants, as indicated by the Arabic form of his title. In Tyre, Jews were engaged in glass blowing. Now we're moving up the coast, and we come to the city of Tyre. There the Jews were engaged in glass blowing, and some were shop owners. Here, too, the Jews had a functionary called the merchant's clerk. So there was somebody, an intermediary, who man apparently, it's not giving the Arabic word for it, but that's what's called in English. Tyre was no less an important Jewish center than Ramlah. And when the Seljuks, again, the pronunciation I'm not sure of, conquered the Jerusalem in 1071, the Palestinian Academy transferred to Tyre Jews living in the coastal towns. They seem to have been better off than those residing in the center of the country, which is excluding Ramlah, where things were doing very well. Let's see, I've lost the page. I really apologize for that. Let's go back where it says the merchant's clerk. So he apparently served as a third-party trustee for disputed property, or perhaps he was the head of the merchants, as indicated by the Arabic title for his name. Okay, there we go. Entire Jews that are going to Tyre up the coast, which is in Lebanon today, were engaged in glass blowing, and some were shop owners. Here, too, the Jews had a functionary called the merchant's clerk. Tyre was no less an important Jewish center than Ramlah. And when the Seljuks conquered Jerusalem in 1071 and were moving up, the Palestinian Academy transferred to Tyre. Jews were living in the coastal towns, seemed to have been better off than those residing in the center of the country, like say, with exception, he says, of Ramleh. Jews were engaged in many trades, and particularly dyeing, that is, changing colors, in which they had a monopoly. Their financial hardships were further aggravated by the burden of taxes. Jerusalem bore the heaviest tax load. Now we had just a little bit more, and we're going to get into this. Let's see. Let's finish it up. He says, the Goanate of Palestine. Now, so where we had the Gaonim, these illustrious scholars, these people, these holy, holy scholars, who had authority going back to the time, all the way back to the time of the Beis Hamikdash. So these scholars had tremendous power to be able to disseminate Judaism and the real faith, all in different kinds of ways. That was in Babylon. Then you come to the Gaonate of Palestine, though, but the same thing is going on in Israel. And here we have the names. I don't know if you can read them or not. I'm not going to go through them all. And the dates in which they served as the Gaonim in Eretz Yisrael. Let's go on. During the period, Eretz Yisrael was renowned for its Gaonim, its great men, terrific, holy, holy scholars, and its center of learning. Because of the difficult local conditions, in other words, we just mentioned the taxations and possibly murders and different things that were going on, its Gaonate was overshadowed by the prosperous Jewish diaspora in Babylon. So we understand that the life of the Jews is like a river that flows and stops or overflows and comes back in different kinds of ways, and sometimes it's dry and parched, and it just constantly continuing changing. So here we see that Babylon was a very wealthy place. A number of Gaonim in Eretz Yisrael were members of the Ben Meir family, the most important being Aaron ben Meir. The Gaon Solomon ben Yehuda was the head of the community from 1027 to 1051. The Gaon Daniel ben Azariah was related to the Babylonian exile arch, who was David ben Zakkai. The last of the Gaonim in Eretz Yisrael were Elijah ben Solomon and his son Abiatar. So we have all of this relationship in these names. He has these documents. The latter, that is Haim, Dr. Beinart, he has the documentation. This is what he's bringing the conclusions. The latter, who lived during the period of the Crusades, moved to Tripoli, where he died in 1109. So we see the time span expanding a little bit. The Palestinian Academy moved to Damascus, where it continued to function for about 100 years under the name Hatzevi Academy, or Eretz Yisrael Hatzevi Academy. So we see here that the Crusades came. Then the Palestinian Academy had to move to Damashek, to Damascus, where it continued to function over there for another 100 years. This is Baruch Fleischman. We're getting a little taste of what's going on, and we'll try to do better with the book. The book's a little bit hard for me to handle. The very interesting ideas that are being generated here.